Good morning.
Morning.
Welcome, everyone. Culture is an incredibly important ingredient in our ongoing national conversation. It shapes our political understanding and the surface area available for critical issues to be debated and resolved. We live in a time when the government is clearly seeking to shape cultural understanding in deliberately narrow ways. In recent months, the Smithsonian has been accused of focusing too much on how bad slavery was. There's a deliberate movement to resurrect statues and monuments of the lost cause. As a veteran of our political system and someone deeply interested in promoting principled and effective leadership, I know the purpose of these efforts is to limit the stories we hear, and in doing so, reduce the range of political debate about the future of our country. And that's why this panel, Monuments and Commemorations, Race, Culture, and Civic Space, is so important today. From highways that cut through Black neighborhoods to monuments that celebrate lost causes, America's civic landscape has itself been a kind of archive of cultural hegemony, a kind of one-eyed patriotism. The true picture is much more layered, complex, and even unifying in its own way. And today, Theaster Gates, Deborah Archer, and Paul Farber are here to share with us the inspiring stories of what they do every single day and to help us reckon with the time we're in. And I want to start with Theaster Gates. You are someone who has worked to turn materials and spaces, whether they are an abandoned bank or archives of Black magazines or clay itself, into vessels of remembrance and renewal. You've also provided us with some very beautiful visuals, and I'd like you to talk about how art can act as a civic healing agent.
Thank you so much, Anthony. It's great to be here with you all. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this question over the last several weeks, kind of imagining the ways in which not only art, but architecture has a way to help repronounce the dignity of a place. And I think that I use this word dignity quite a bit because I feel like there are things where if our objects are kicked out of the Smithsonian, if our objects are removed under some policy, it may create a situation where we imagine that the things that our grandparents and great-grandparents did aren't important anymore. And that when I can grab these moments, an old building that is in a Black neighborhood, and I can take it from a dilapidated state to a fully active state, I think what it does for the 8-year-old that walks past that building every day is it says that my neighborhood is important, and my block is important, my main street is important, I'm important because I live on a block that's important, and that the work isn't just about economic development or about culture even. Sometimes it's about changing the perception of the soul that you have the right to live in a place that is beautiful, you have a right to live in a place that's clean, that's free of waste, and that if our governments have situations where the resources are not available or the resources have been constrained in some way, that it behooves us to continue to ensure that the architectural and artistic imaginary for a child, for an adult, for a senior, that they have the ability to know that they're from a place that's deeply resilient. So people always ask me, why do you renovate instead of just tearing the building down and building something new? It would be a lot cheaper. It's like, no, the point is that there is loaded history in that thing, in the restoration and redemption of that building or that object or that shoe shine stand, that those things, that redemption has everything to do with the resilience of Black folk. And I want to show resilience, not just newness.
That's beautiful. Thank you very much for that. Yeah. Professor Archer, you've written and spoken about how law and infrastructure are never neutral. The structure and belonging and access and exclusion are part of the history of how U.S. infrastructure has been built, whether it's highways or water systems or public housing or parks. and how all these things can reinforce inequality and segregation. What has our infrastructure historically told us about ourselves as a nation? And just as importantly, what do you think the stakes are involved in who gets to decide what stays, what goes, and what gets built?
Well, thank you for inviting me to participate. I'm excited to be on a panel about monuments and commemoration. I wish I could say the word, though. My work really focuses on the intersection of race and space and all the inequality and injustice we see there. And our communities are really living monuments to white supremacy. The transportation and other infrastructure that we drive through those communities without respect for who lives there. The communities that are targeted in predatory ways or neglected, the things that we don't. Oh, okay. So maybe you all didn't hear me mispronounce commemoration. Should I start from the beginning? I can start again? All right, monuments and commemoration. Right? But our communities are monuments to white supremacy because we are destroying them with predatory infrastructure, not giving any consideration to who lives there. We neglect them. We don't give them all the basic services that they need. We will treat them as the path of least resistance or sacrifice zones and put everything in those communities. The things that we deny them, the public benefits we deny them, the public space, the beauty that we deny to those communities are all a part of commemorating and lifting up white supremacy. White supremacy in so many ways is about place. It's about social place, right? Convincing Black folks and other people of color of their social place, and then doing the work to keep them in that place. And what more effective tool to keep people in their place socially than to keep them in their place physically? To limit where they can go, the places they have access to, and who they think they are and can become based on the places that you limit them to. And transportation has always been key to that, because of course everyone knows that transportation is far more than moving from A to B. Transportation is the infrastructure of high quality education. It is the infrastructure of good health, and it is the infrastructure of a vibrant multiracial democracy. We have used it to undermine this multiracial democracy. And race and infrastructure are really linked. You can't think about America's Second Reconstruction, the Montgomery bus boycott, the Freedom Riders who were demanding equal access to transportation, those who marched over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. There's this link. And so after we saw the successes of the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, and the dismantling of those invisible tools that we use to divide and segregate and lock people in, we saw communities, the federal government, state government, turn to infrastructure for a more durable, more visible way to lock people in place. Yeah. So as you mentioned, we built highways that destroyed vibrant, beautiful, wonderful Black communities. We have highways that replaced invisible segregation lines. So in Montgomery and Atlanta, they used racial zoning laws, and they built the highway on the same boundaries where the racial zoning laws had boundaries to perpetuate that. In Indianapolis, they used redlining. And there are highways in downtown Indianapolis that follow the exact path of the redlining. So we destroyed communities, deprived them of economic investment through redlining, and then destroyed them further with highways. But it wasn't enough, because this country is about belt and suspenders, and we know that the power of racism is in how it can adapt. So we just didn't limit it to highways. We built roads that do the same. They are symbols and send a message about who belongs and who doesn't. We have used kind of street planning techniques, one-way roads that made it difficult to move from a white community, from a Black community to a white community. They wanted to make sure you could only go away. We put walls in the middle of the street. In Atlanta, they built segregation walls. One was called the Atlanta-Berlin Wall that stood to block Black people from accessing white communities, but also a reminder that you are less than, that you are not valued, you are not wanted. We think about public transportation, which we know started under this cloud of explicit segregation and racism, and now it has evolved under a cloud of dog whistles that focus on false narratives of Black criminality to create transportation deserts in Black communities because of neglect, but also in white communities because they want to keep those, the people who use public transportation out, denying them access to the economic opportunities that are increasingly in our suburbs. And even sidewalks and pedestrian infrastructure. We built these communities that have highways running through them, major roadways, making it unsafe for the people who live there, and then didn't invest in those communities to allow them to navigate their own spaces. And rather than respond to that underinvestment with investment, we do what we do all the time for Black and brown communities. You don't get resources, you don't get investment, you get police and you get punishment. And so we criminalize people who walk in the street because they can't walk on the sidewalks. And all of this is meaningful, right? It divided and destroyed Black communities, robbing Black folks of economic wealth, right? Many folks lost their home, the key that we know that is to intergenerational wealth. It was a symbol of a psychological barrier. It became a line that government didn't cross. They didn't cross to take out the trash. They didn't cross to give you water infrastructure, to invest in you. And so today we have these communities and wonder how they came to be this way and blame the residents for the conditions in those communities when in fact the government took every step that they could to make that possible. And today we have an opportunity because, as you know, our transportation infrastructure is crumbling and falling apart. And we can either double down and rebuild it the way it has been, denying Black and brown communities access to opportunity, or we can, you know, they keep saying build back better. We can build back better for everyone and make sure that everyone has access to all the tools to live a happy, healthy, joy-filled, and choice-filled life.
Wow, thank you. So we have the at the neighborhood level even, the structures that are there and the need to preserve. We have the physical infrastructure of the highways, and now, Paul, you run the Monuments Lab. You've been looking at monuments across the country and really auditing them and seeing what's there. What do they tell us about where we are as a country, and how do they inform the culture that we live in today?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you to this esteemed panel, and especially to our dear organizers who, when they call, we go. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Sarah Lewis and Sherrilyn Ifill. We're here to talk about monuments and infrastructure and the interplay between symbols and systems. And they are not diametrically opposed. As hearing quite powerfully, they are locked together. I think what is important to think about, and this goes across tens of thousands of conversations we at Monument Lab have had with people across the country, from the National Mall to North Lawndale in Chicago to our hometown in Philadelphia and beyond, is that people carry with them an idea of what a monument is, but it often feels just out of reach. There is nothing that is inherently a monument in American culture. There are things that we call monuments, spotlight as monuments, preserve as monuments, resource as monuments, protect, and sometimes criminalize dissent around those things called monuments. The people who have been the most efficient at filling the void of that definition have largely been those who've enshrined the lost cause across this country. Our organization did an audit of America's monument landscape, looking at close to 50,000 conventional monuments across every US state, territory, numerous tribal communities, looking at data from the federal, state, local, tribal, institutional level. What we found, I would say there's a lot of people in this room who could read the audit, but they have also walked down a street in the United States, and they probably know as well that monuments have always changed, that the monument landscape is predominantly white and male, that violence and conquest are the most common themes of American monuments, and that the full story of the United States is not told through our monument landscape. There has never been a moment that our monument landscape has been fully complete. Just to give a sense of that, when we look at the top 50 figures with monuments dedicated to them, there are 3 women in the top 50. The number 1 woman on that count was Joan of Arc. The other 2, Harriet Tubman and Sacagawea. Mm-hmm. In fact, throughout our study, it was far easier to find symbolic representations of women in the monument landscape, say mermaids, than it was to actual US congresswomen. Across the monument landscape, there are, when we looked at just Civil War monuments, 1% of Civil War monuments mention the word slavery. The Civil War is rooted in slavery. And when I say 1%, I'm not necessarily talking about the stories of self-emancipated Black folks who fought for their freedom or the long legacies of enslavement of the Civil War that still live across our symbols and our systems. I mean, the word is in the title, on the plaque, or maybe in the metadata around what the monuments are. Alternatively, when you look at in our study set, when you see the word Confederate, only 3% mention defeat. I could tell you the other words that I had seen, glory, honor. In fact, in a monument previously in New Orleans, the words white supremacy were inscribed in stone. So while that is the legacy of monuments we have inherited, and they've often been in concert with other infrastructure projects, we've seen something else as well. You saw scenes of the artist Sonia Clark and the project that we did with the Getting Word African American Oral History Project in Monticello, that others who are saying, wait a second, there is no single definition of monument. A monument is what we bestow power and presence to, what we honor, what we uphold. That's been the work of artists, of teachers, of communities who said, we are going to call this site a monument, or we are going to gather around a monument that exists to amplify our presence and our power. There is no single story that can stand in one place. It always requires a multiplicity of voices. And perhaps, as we have seen, it's far easier to protest a statue than a statute. They are visible. They have been put there as reminders of power. And it is those who step up and amplify their power and form coalitions that can also take new monumental meanings as well.
Thank you. I'm actually going to come back to Theaster for a minute because there's a connection between what Paul's saying and what you're saying. So Paul is basically laying out for us that there are lots of things that could be monuments. It's sort of a community decision in a certain sense.
Yeah.
And you are saying very similar things. And yet, when we do an audit, we sort of focus on these sort of state-approved or public structures that are put in place. Tell me, what does it take to do the work you do? And how can that be done at scale?
Well, what's interesting about what both Deborah and Paul are saying is that, you know, if you were to think about the Confederate project as a kind of psychic playbook, it seems that what folk understood was that there was power in symbol. And there is no, and that folk had the resources and the agency to kind of build narrative because they knew in a generation people would forget. And then the only thing they might remember is the thing that's on the statue. And that we would use the symbolic work to be a trigger for a future, because monuments aren't just about an acknowledgement of the past or the present, it's trying to speak to a future. And so if the psychic playbook suggests that people have the right to agency to uplift the things that they believe in, and that those things will help perpetuate a sense of themselves in relationship to a derogatory self or a derogatory other, that maybe we should also build a psychic spiritual log of great ecstatic experiences, of important moments of note, of important people, of sites that would go under-recognized by others. And we shouldn't wait for the city of New York to name a street or the city of Chicago to name a place. Or we shouldn't wait, in my case, I'm thinking about the great Muddy Waters, a blues musician in Chicago. We shouldn't wait until Nina's house is gone, Sun Ra's house is gone. You know, these moments should be moments that we capture because we have the agency to say, this thing is important, that this thing deserves to be photographed, written about, enlivened, and some activated over and over, and that the important stories of a place or a person or our people, that I think we have to stop waiting for an external validation of what is important to us. We have to have self-agency. So what I've tried to do is just say the South Side of Chicago is important to me. It doesn't matter if anybody else believes that it's important, and the house next to my house is important and it's worth mowing, which means that the street is worth fixing whether the government invests in roads or not. And that there is a little bit of a kind of self-deterministic attitude that I have about the project, but so did they. So even the defeated said, we won and we're glorious. If the defeated can say we won and we're glorious, well, what do the victors say? So I think that in a way the hope was to try to make a project specific enough in one location that, you know, when I had an opportunity to restore a house, it wasn't just about the restoration of that house. It was like that house could then go to a world exhibition in Kassel, Germany. And I could talk about my little house on Dorchester at this world place. So for the last 20 years, I've been running into people saying, oh, I really want to come visit your house. Because the artist decided that this place was important and talked about it, right? And I think that it really has to be the agency of a people to protect the future understanding of who we were. We have to protect who we were today so that the future understands who we were. You know? So I'm not making a work of art. When I think about Kerry James Marshall's show right now, he's not painting for today. He's painting so that the future remembers today. You know?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to pass the plate now. Let's go.
You could go to Paul next, so I don't have to follow that.
She said that knowing I'm coming right to you.
I saw you looking.
Coming right to you. One of the other hats you wear, Professor Archer, is as president of the ACLU. And in that role, you're required to approach freedom of expression and public memory differently in this moment when civic space is contested and shrinking. How do you do that?
Yeah. So it's a good question, and I promise I'm going to answer. I just wanted to pull on a thread of something that Paul mentioned, that you said 1% of monuments mention slavery.
Of Civil War.
Of Civil War. You would think, based on the public discussion, that 99% of every word on any of those monuments is slavery, and it's absolutely outrageous, and something that you said I think is so important about giving communities agency to really force folks to recognize the beauty in their communities. And I think that's a challenge that lawyers and advocates have in front of us, is to find a way to build those tools, to allow communities to dream together, to imagine together, and then to fight together to protect their communities. It's related to the infrastructure piece. I represent a community in southern Illinois where they have been deprived of water infrastructure for decades, a predominantly black community surrounded by a white county. The white county has beautiful water infrastructure, pipes and sewer and waste management systems, but that black community has been neglected. And if it rains for 5 minutes at this point, the streets fill with raw sewage. Their houses, their basements fill with raw sewage. There is feces baked into their walls, because it happens so frequently. And a few years ago, one of these floods happened, and the federal government said, it's a disaster area. We're going to buy out your homes so that you can live someplace else and you can go away. And the county said, great, we're not fixing anything. We're not dealing with your health problems. We're not fixing the water. We'll buy your homes. They offered people $5,000 for their home to turn this community of black homeowners into a community of renters who can't afford to rent there, or they have to make the choice to live without the dignity and respect, to not be treated as humans. And so it's been an honor to work with them, to give them the tools to fight for their community. And I think we have to think about how we can do that more broadly. Very quickly on the question that you asked me, in response to that question, I think about what it means to fight for civil rights and racial justice. Those who oppose racial justice have always known that it is not enough to challenge the laws that claim to mandate racial justice and equality. They need to undermine the systems and the structures and the norms that help give those rights meaning and help people fight to expand those rights. They have to undermine the communities that come together to fight for each other, to voice injustice, to tell their stories. They have to erase the stories that help us understand how we got to where we are, to give people a blueprint for how to fight for justice moving forward. And so in this moment where all of that infrastructure of civil rights and democracy is torn down, I think we are seeing how important fighting to protect the ability to engage in First Amendment protected activities is to just the fight that we're engaged in, how important it is to protect people's voices and the spaces for them to use those voices. Because when we silence folks, we don't just lose words. We lose their stories. We lose our collective understanding of who we are, how we got here, and how we can move forward together. When we engage in censorship, either through book bans or through restrictions on what you can teach or where you can engage in protest, if we criminalize protest, we're taking away one of the primary tools that we have to speak truth to power and demand that our government do better. So we have to treat the right to engage in First Amendment protected activity as fundamental to this fight to protect our democracy. And of course, it's not just about resisting the targeting of our First Amendment rights. It's about doing the affirmative work to create spaces where folks can elevate their voices and come together. It is about recognizing that marginalized communities are suffering the most, right? That First Amendment means nothing if it is being torn down by power and money and fear. And so in doing this work now, it is more important than has ever been. And I think we can see that. And it's about recognizing how complicated it is, that it's not a simple question. It is not just about saying you have a right to speak. It is about doing everything we can to make that right meaningful, to make it accessible, and to protect it.
Thank you. Yes. Paul, coming to you you did a project called Beyond Granite on the National Mall. And in that project, you invited artists and communities to temporarily overwrite national symbols. And when you did that, what happened? What was the result?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I also want to recognize I was one of the co-curators. Salome Chatilit, who we'll be hearing from, was thought partner and dear collaborator with a whole host of others. And it started with the question of what stories remain untold on the National Mall. And when we started that work, and we were given an invitation, which now feels like a lifetime ago or a fever dream, but it was real. 2 million people saw it on the National Mall. We wanted to start from the standpoint that though that was the first sanctioned public art exhibition on the National Mall, that there was nothing that we could do that wouldn't be, there was nothing we could do that would do anything different than the great technologies of Marian Anderson singing on Easter Sunday in 1939, desegregating the National Mall. 200,000 marchers from around the country, predominantly black folks, for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Activists who organized to save their lives and their friends' lives around the AIDS crisis. We said there's already been these technologies, they just didn't have a permit for more than a few hours. Those permits, by the way, were for First Amendment rights. And we said, let's start with that question. What stories remain untold? Because we want to play with the idea. None of the stories are untold per se. They may not be written in stone or granite or marble, but let's see what happens. Marian Anderson's name is said on the National Mall hundreds, if not thousands of times every single day. So when putting that to the artist Vanessa German, she created a intricate sculpture at the foot of the Lincoln Memorial, and it becomes a reference point. The artist Wendy Red Star created a piece on the island small island in Constitution Gardens dedicated to the signers of the Declaration of Independence, which was dedicated way back when in the 1980s. And, but age-old in its own way. And she pulled together, she's Apsaloga, and she pulled together the names of chiefs and tribal representatives who came to the nation's capital to advocate for their people with a series of treaties that were often brokered either by an X or by a thumbprint. So she took her thumbprint, put it into monumental-sized glass, and used her handwriting to write out not only the names of the chiefs and tribal representatives, but their testimony. So in each of these instances, there were 6 artists total. They wanted to create something that would play with what was firmly there, but remind us that the National Mall is not an eternal space. It is one that had to be created. It is one that when it was dedicated as a segregated space. And that has had to be liberated, and yet we think of it as the ultimate people's pedestal. Think about the work of Paul Ramirez Jonas, who created a monumental bell tower that played the notes of My Country 'Tis of Thee, which is a song that has had great resonances, taken from a colonial hymn to one that is patriotic to one that's been echoed on the mall by Marian Anderson, Dr. King, Aretha Franklin, and so on. The key with this work is that it played every note except the last one. It invited people to come up and say, you ring the bell. What do you ring it for? To remind us democracy is not a finished project. I think that monuments should be seen not as the end points of history, but as the way stations. In this moment, and we think about that project just 2 years ago, we're facing a profound pushback against just the telling of the real full history, as you were saying. And in the words that we've heard, a half-truth is a lie, and we know it. We just fighting for a fuller history, a multiplicity of voices, a necessary step to gather around together, and especially outside, around monuments that we have inherited and the other ones we've yet to make. That is one of the tools in our vast toolkit that we need for coalition, so that we bridge the gap, not just what is present, what is absent, and we increase the story to tell the full history.
Thank you. So, yes, you can applaud for that. Pluralism is under attack. And the things that are happening right now in this moment determine a lot about the future. And there are a lot of people, not people in this room, but outside this room, who are keeping their heads down and, waiting for a different day to come to stick their heads up. What's the right response right now? What's the right response?
He's looking at you, I'm looking at you.
I depending on who's asking, sympathetic outsiders who like to buy art come to me and they say, thank you for what you're doing, what can I do? I have to say, I'm using my time and my resources to ensure that the things that have held us together in the past continue to hold us. That the spaces that we know and the images that we know and the histories that we know, that now I feel like each community needs to protect their things, because a national, there is not one institution that will be fit to carry the stories of our legacies. And that we need an amalgamation of believers, individuals, institutions, informal institutions, clubs, networks, the things that held us together in the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s. We need to expect more from our fraternities and sororities, more from our black churches. And I was talking to a gentleman yesterday, and he was saying, I went to Howard, and there was a conversation between Roberta Flack and Donny Hathaway, and it was just in the basement, in a room that hadn't been touched in a very long time. And I said, God bless that room. God bless that it hadn't been touched since 72. You know, thank goodness that we actually have places where, in a way, histories go to be forgotten so that they can be, so that instead of being burned, they're protected and no one's looking in the basement of Howard. That in a way, this thing that we would have said, shame on our institutions for not taking better care of our things. I'm like, God bless our institutions for the precarity of their invisibility, so that invisibility becomes the thing that actually protects us. So we have to stop imagining that there's only one solution, and that solution is cleaner, brighter, more money, and whiter. We have so much capacity, and we have to believe again in our attics and in our ballrooms and in our basements and in our living rooms, that we have the capacity to hold our histories and narratives close, and we should.
Great.
+1 to everything. I mean, I think in that spirit, number one is find your people. And the power of coalition is so incredibly important. It does not mean that we all share every single thing, but we find common values and visions and we fight for each other. And you look out for people who may have gone through struggle before and you can learn from, and you look out for people who are more vulnerable than you, and you step in front and you step out and you make sure that you protect. And so finding your people, we're doing that today, but we have to challenge ourselves. We have to, both be very boundaried in it and also find those moments and those allegiances. We have to remember that there's no safe spot. There's no institution that just is going to be out of the heat of things. So nonetheless, we need retreat. We need enclaves. We need places where we can nourish and power each other up. We've been saying that before, we were all pushing boulders up a hill, but we had the wind at our backs. Now, the wind is right in our front. And so what are we going to do? We got to sometimes take that wind for those around us. We got to push even harder. We have to take breathers. And then finally, we have to tell the full history. I mean, I'm saying there's a lot of issues that are being kind of left on the table. Freedom of speech especially is one of them. Let's go ahead and grab that back. History buffs.
I'm trying.
Yeah, keep on. History buffs. I try to tell people, hey, if you love history, you watch the History Channel, you love documentaries, you'll Netflix binge. Oh my gosh, I have so much history for you. Luckily and thankfully, that history has been in the attics. They've been in those sororities, fraternities. They've been in the schoolhouses. They've been being taught, so they are available. They may not have had the spotlight, the shine, the money, the preservation, but they had the love, they had the sacredness. So what we need to do is tell the whole history and stand on that.
Yeah, all right.
So I agree with everything that you all have said. I think I approach this also a little differently. I just want to acknowledge these times are really, really difficult. Every day is a struggle and a challenge. But at the end of the day, I still think that it is a tremendous blessing to be alive in this moment. One, to be reaping the benefits of our ancestors and the people who fought and led and just survived, so that we could have the opportunities that we have to be able to come together in this space, to lead the organizations that we lead, to work with the communities that we work with, to be able to express ourselves the way that we do. But it's also a blessing to have the opportunity to do such incredible, important work when there is such important work left to be done, to finish the vision and the work that they started. I have a really amazing mentor who says to me and reminds me very frequently in these days that we were all standing in the shade of trees we did not plant and drinking from wells we did not dig. So my job, your job, is to get up every morning and to dig holes to plant trees and to dig wells, to fight for change that we may never see in our lifetimes. This may seem very sudden, that this has happened all at once, but the moment that we are in now has been planned for decades. And we often find ourselves responding to the moment, fighting to protect ourselves and our communities and our loved ones. And it's important that we do that. People keep saying, we've seen worse, we're going to be fine. Not all of us will be fine. And we will only, the ones who will be fine because we will all come together to fight to make sure that is true. But we also have to do the work to envision a more just, more equitable future. It is, people talk about the decades it's going to take to rebuild our systems that are being torn down. And that's true, but I don't think that we want to rebuild all those systems because they weren't worthy of us to begin with, right? They helped us get to this point. They never gave us the justice that we wanted. So I just think every day, wherever you are, whatever skills you have, whatever resources you have, we all need to get up and do what we can to protect ourselves and our communities and to fight for a more just and beautiful future.
Thank you. Just really quickly, I want to ask you one last question. We've covered a lot of ground, but I'd love to have just one example of something that you see in your work that gives you hope.
Last week, we opened a space called the Land School. That was a 25-year closed Catholic school, St. Lawrence. And for years I had really kind of groaned that there were no venues for black music on the South Side. And that there used to be 10 venues on a block. And I think a part of my practice I've just kind of dedicated to like replanting venues. And last night I went to a beautiful performance where this brother Isaiah Collier, kind of great saxophonist, was playing Norman's Bistro. It was just a spot on the block, you know? And he was wailing, you know? And it was like, is this like listening to a young John Coltrane? Like, am I in a moment? And I feel like the recreation of this school, which took 7 years, I think Thelma Golden can understand this, it was like, it was a long time, that I feel like that planting that you're talking about, it's the work where sometimes when you're in it, it feels thankless and unending, but to see 500 people listening to black classical music in our auditorium that used to be filled with young black kids who were on their way to a brighter future because these nuns were there kind of, you know. But I feel really proud that I've been able to open the Land School and that we'll have one more venue on the South Side.
Excellent. Thank you. Real quick.
In 30 seconds, I think what gives me hope is there are so many people who are vulnerable right now, who have so much to lose, whose safety is on the line, whose well-being is on the line, but still we are seeing videos and hearing stories about people who are stepping up and standing in the way to protect them, their families, to protect their communities. We're putting everything on the line to fight back against this authoritarian turn in the violence that we're seeing.
Thank you.
It's the work of artists in local communities who are building connections across locations. It's our friends at the Emmett Till Interpretive Center working to bring a monument and memorial for Emmett and Mamie to the Mississippi Delta. It's A Long Walk Home in Chicago building a monument to Rekia Boyd and celebrating Black girlhood. It's the artists like Chinoopa Hanska Luger making a National War Memorial to the Buffalo that was never asked for, but is nonetheless, in terms of from the government, but was summoned in other ways. So artists are going to keep leading us toward a vision of past, present, and future together.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And on a personal note, I want to thank Sarah and Sherrilyn for their great leadership in bringing us together. Monuments, commemoration, race, culture, and civic space. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Great job.